I still can't believe how my life flipped upside down in the span of a single year. One day, I'm a broke graduate student scraping together tuition. The next, I'm married to a stranger and working for the most powerful man in the city. But the strangest part is that those two men might be the same person. Let me start from the very beginning. My name is Elena Vance, and I was raised by my grandmother Agatha after my parents passed away when I was 5. She was a retired school teacher with a heart of gold and a spine of steel. We lived in a small house on the outskirts of Seattle. Money was always tight, but Grandma made sure I never felt poor. She taught me to read before I started kindergarten. She took me to the library every Saturday. And she always told me that the only thing no one could ever take away from me was my education. So I studied hard. I got into a good university on a scholarship. I majored in molecular biology because I wanted to understand how life worked at its smallest level. I dreamed of becoming a researcher. Maybe finding cures for diseases that had taken too many people too soon. But life has a cruel sense of humor. When I was 22, Grandma collapsed in the kitchen while making breakfast. The doctor said she had a rare heart condition that required immediate surgery. The cost was astronomical. More than I could ever earn in a decade of part-time jobs. I sold my car. I sold my textbooks. I even sold my mother's old wedding ring. But it still wasn't enough. I was desperate. And desperation makes you do strange things. That's when an old family friend named Mrs. Crawford called me. She had known my grandmother since college, and she had heard about our situation. She said she might have a solution, but it was unusual. She explained that a wealthy family she was connected with had a grandson who needed a wife. Not for love, but for appearances. The grandmother of that family was dying, and she wanted to see her grandson settled before she passed. The grandson agreed to a marriage of convenience. He would pay a substantial sum to the bride. And in return, the bride would sign a prenuptial agreement and maintain the illusion of a happy marriage for 1 year. After that, they could quietly divorce. Mrs. Crawford said the family was looking for someone trustworthy. Someone who wouldn't leak the arrangement to the press. And she thought of me. I remember sitting in my cramped apartment, staring at the stack of hospital bills on my desk. Grandma was in the ICU. Her heartbeat was irregular. The doctor said she had maybe 6 months without the surgery. I had 2 choices. Watch the only family I had left fade away, or sign a contract with a stranger. I chose to sign. The wedding was held in a private courthouse in downtown Seattle. There were no flowers, no music, just a judge, 2 lawyers, and a man I had never met before. His name was Jared Foster. Or so I was told. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through me. He barely glanced at me during the ceremony. He signed his name with a quick flourish, handed me a thick envelope, and said, "I have to fly to London tonight. I'll call you when I get back." Then he walked out. I never even got his phone number. The envelope contained more money than I had ever seen in my life. I paid Grandma's surgery bills the next morning, and I told her I had gotten a generous grant from a private foundation. She was too weak to ask questions. She just squeezed my hand and said she was proud of me. Months passed. Grandma recovered slowly. She moved back home and started baking cookies again. I went back to school and finished my degree. But I never heard from Jared. No calls. No emails. No letters. I told myself it was fine. It was a business transaction. Nothing more. But I can't deny that a small part of me felt discarded. Like I wasn't even worth a goodbye. After graduation, I started applying for jobs. The biotech industry was competitive. But I had good grades and a few published papers from my research assistantship. I sent out dozens of resumes. And somehow I landed an interview with the Blackwood Group. It was one of the largest biotech companies in the world, headquartered in Manhattan, with branches in Europe and Asia. They were developing cutting-edge gene therapies for rare diseases. I was thrilled just to get a call back. The interview process was grueling. 3 rounds of technical questions, a presentation on my thesis work, and then a final panel with the executive team. I walked into that boardroom with my heart pounding. And there he was, sitting at the head of the table. Damian Blackwood, the CEO himself. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s. But he had an aura of authority that made the room feel smaller. I recognized his face from magazine covers. But something else tugged at my memory. Something I couldn't place. I shook it off and focused on my presentation. When I finished, he asked a few sharp questions. Then he leaned back and said, "Miss Vance, you're overqualified for a junior research position, but I have an opening for a personal assistant. Someone who can handle high-level coordination between our R&D and legal departments. Would you consider that role?" I was stunned. I had never worked as an assistant, but the salary he mentioned was 3 times what I had expected. And I still owed money for Grandma's follow-up treatments. I said yes without hesitation. So I became Damian Blackwood's personal assistant. My first day was a blur of introductions. His executive assistant, Peter, showed me the ropes. Peter was a wiry man in his 50s with a dry sense of humor. He warned me. Mr. Blackwood is a perfectionist. He works late. He expects you to anticipate his needs. And he doesn't tolerate gossip. But he's fair. He's not the monster the tabloids make him out to be. I nodded and tried to absorb everything. The job was demanding, but exhilarating. Damian was intense. He would go through 100 emails before breakfast. He could spot a formatting error from across the room. And he had a habit of calling me into his office at odd hours to discuss strategy. But he also listened. When I suggested a more efficient way to organize our clinical trial data, he actually implemented it. When I mentioned that our vendors were overcharging us, he asked me to handle the renegotiation. He trusted me. And that trust made me work harder than I ever had. Within a few months, I became his right hand. I knew his coffee order, his preferred pen brand, his allergy to shellfish. I knew that he hated loud noises, and that he would pace when he was stressed. I also learned that he was married, or at least he had a wife somewhere. No one had ever seen her, and Damian never spoke about her. The office rumors were wild. Some said she was a reclusive heiress. Others said they were separated. One secretary whispered that she had run off with a tennis coach. I didn't care. It was none of my business. But I started noticing small things. The way Damian looked at me sometimes. A flicker of something warm before he turned away. The way he would touch my shoulder when he passed my desk. The way he remembered my favorite snack from the vending machine. I told myself it was just friendly. He was my boss. And I was married. Even if it was a sham marriage. I still wore a ring on my finger. Not a diamond. Just a simple silver band that Jared had shoved at me during the ceremony. I never took it off. Then the divorce papers arrived. I was at my desk when a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside was a legal notice from a firm in Seattle. It stated that Jared Foster was petitioning for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences, and he was demanding $2 million in damages for emotional distress. I almost laughed out loud. Emotional distress. He had abandoned me for 18 months. He had never even called to ask if I was alive. And now he wanted me to pay him. It was absurd. I called the law firm immediately. A paralegal named Miller answered. I told him there must be a mistake. He replied coldly. Miss Vance, my client has evidence that you engaged in conduct that harmed his reputation. We are prepared to take this to court if you do not sign the agreement. I asked what evidence. He said photographs. And he refused to elaborate. I hung up feeling sick. That night I told Peter about the situation. I had no one else to confide in. Peter was discreet, and he had become a friend. He listened quietly. Then he said, You need a good lawyer. Not the kind that works for the other side. Do you know anyone? I shook my head. Peter said, I might know someone, but it will cost you. I said I didn't have money for a lawyer. He said, then talk to Mr. Blackwood. He has a legal team that handles his personal matters. They are sharks, and they are loyal to him. I hesitated. It felt wrong to involve my boss in my private mess. But I was desperate. The next morning, I asked Damian for a private word. We sat in his office, the city skyline gleaming behind him. I told him everything. The marriage of convenience. The money for my grandmother. The abandonment. And now the divorce demand. He listened without interrupting. His face was unreadable. When I finished, he said, send me the documents. I'll have my lawyers look at them. I thanked him. And as I turned to leave, he added, Elena, you should have told me earlier. I would have helped you. His voice was soft, and something in my chest tightened. A few days later, Damian's lawyers came back with a report. The photographs were fake. They had been digitally altered to make it look like I was meeting a man in a hotel room. The man was actually my cousin. We had been having lunch at a public restaurant, but the background had been changed. The timestamps had been manipulated. It was a clear case of fabrication. Damian was furious. He called a meeting with his legal team and said, I want this resolved. I want her reputation cleared. And I want whoever did this held accountable. The divorce hearing was set for a Monday morning. I walked into the courthouse with Damian's lawyers flanking me. Miller was there, looking smug. But Jared Foster was not. Miller claimed his client was out of the country. The judge allowed the hearing to proceed. Miller presented his fabricated evidence, and I felt my stomach drop. But then Damian's lawyer stood up. He presented the forensic analysis. He showed the judge the metadata discrepancies. He proved that the photographs were doctored. Miller's face went white. The judge dismissed the case, and he ordered Jared Foster to pay my legal costs. I walked out of that courthouse on shaky legs. Damian was waiting for me in the parking lot. He was leaning against his black SUV, looking like a statue carved from ice. I walked up to him and said, why did you do all this for me? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, because I know what it's like to be accused of something you never did. And because I couldn't bear to see you hurt. His voice cracked on the last word. And I realized he wasn't just being a good boss. He cared about me. The thought terrified me. That evening, I invited him to Grandma's house for a small dinner. I wanted to thank him properly. Grandma had been asking to meet my boss. She was curious about the man who had given me such a good job. I cooked a simple pasta dish. Damian brought a bottle of wine, and we sat around the old oak table in the kitchen. Grandma was in high spirits. She told stories about my childhood. She showed Damian my baby photos, and he laughed. A genuine, warm laugh that I had never heard from him before. I looked at him across the table. The way the lamplight caught the edges of his jaw. The way he tilted his head when he listened. And something clicked. After dinner, I went to my old bedroom to find a photo album for Grandma. I opened the closet and pulled out a box of random mementos. At the bottom was the envelope from my wedding day. I had never opened it again. I pulled out the marriage certificate, and I stared at the photo attached to it. It was a small passport-style picture of me and Jared Foster on our wedding day. I looked different. My hair was shorter. I had been thinner. But Jared was unmistakable. Same dark hair. Same sharp cheekbones. Same intense eyes. It was Damian. My hands started trembling. I ran back to the kitchen. I slammed the certificate on the table in front of Damian. Grandma looked up in surprise. Damian froze. His face went pale. I said, "You are Jared Foster. Why didn't you tell me?" He stared at the photo. Then at me. His voice was hoarse. "Elena, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." He explained that his grandmother had arranged the marriage. She had chosen a woman named Isabel Scott. But when he returned from London after a year, he couldn't find her. He had hired investigators, but they couldn't track her down. He assumed she had taken the money and disappeared. And then he met me at the interview. And my name was Elena Vance, not Isabel Scott. So he never made the connection. He said, I was married to a ghost. And then you appeared. And I fell for you without knowing you were her. He reached across the table. His fingers brushed mine. Elena, I am so sorry. I was so blind. Grandma interrupted. She said, well, this is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. You two are already married. And you clearly have feelings for each other. Stop being idiots and figure it out. I laughed despite myself. Damian smiled. A nervous, hopeful smile. That night we stayed up until dawn, talking. We talked about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. He told me about his father who died when he was 12, and how his mother Grace had become cold and controlling. She pushed him into business. She pushed him into the marriage arrangement. She had even picked out the bride. But when the bride disappeared, Grace was furious. She blamed him for not keeping track of his own wife. Damian said, my mother has never forgiven me for that. She thinks I'm incompetent. She thinks I need her to manage my life. And when you showed up as my assistant, she saw you as a threat. He paused. I think she might be behind the forged photographs. The private investigator she hired was one of her old associates. I was stunned. Your mother tried to destroy me. Damian nodded. And I will make sure she never tries again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Damian moved me into his penthouse. He said it was for safety. But we both knew it was more than that. He wanted to give us a real chance. And I wanted to try. We started living together as a couple. He would make breakfast every morning. Pancakes with fresh berries. He would leave notes on the mirror. You are beautiful. Have a great day. He would hold my hand when we watched movies. And I found myself falling. Falling hard. But Grace's shadow lingered. She called Damian constantly. She demanded to meet me. And when she finally did, it was at a company charity gala. She approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said, Elena, I've heard so much about you. You've done quite well for yourself. From a simple researcher to the CEO's assistant. And now you live in his home. How clever. I clenched my jaw and said, Mrs. Blackwood, I am married to your son. Not because I am clever, but because he chose me. She laughed. A cold, brittle sound. He chose you because you were convenient. But convenience doesn't last. I walked away before I could say something I would regret. Later that night, Damian found me on the balcony. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. He said, I heard what she said, and I want you to know, she is wrong. I chose you because I love you, not because you are convenient. He turned me around, and he kissed me. It was our first real kiss, and it felt like coming home. But Grace's attacks didn't stop. She leaked a story to a gossip magazine. They ran a headline, Blackwood Harris shacks up with secretary. Gold digger or true love. The article painted me as a manipulative social climber. It mentioned my grandmother's hospital bills. It even suggested I had lied about my academic credentials. I was mortified. Damian was livid. He issued a cease and desist. But the damage was done. I became a target for online trolls. Strangers sent me hateful messages. They called me a fraud, a whore, a parasite. I broke down one night. I cried in Damian's arms. I said, maybe your mother is right. Maybe I don't belong here. He held me tighter. He said, "Listen to me. You are the strongest person I know. You survived poverty. You survived abandonment. You survived false accusations. And you never gave up. You are not the problem. My mother is, and I will fix this." He called his mother the next day. I don't know what he said, but when he hung up, his face was hard as stone. He said, "She is going to Switzerland for a long vacation. She will not bother us again. And if she does, I will cut her off completely." I asked if he was sure. He said, "You are my family now. My real family. And I will always choose you." Grace's departure brought a strange peace. Without her interference, Damian and I could focus on each other. We started going on dates. Real dates. He took me to the ballet, to a tiny Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. We walked through Central Park in the autumn leaves. He told me he wanted to start a family. He said, "I know we are still young, but I've waited my whole life to find someone like you. I don't want to wait any longer for the rest." I was nervous about the idea, but I was also excited. Grandma was getting stronger every day. She had moved into a lovely assisted living facility near our penthouse. She came over for dinner every Sunday, and she and Damian would play chess for hours. He was patient with her. He listened to her stories. He even learned her recipe for apple pie. I watched them together, and I felt like I had finally found my tribe. A few months later, Damian proposed again. He got down on one knee in our living room, the skyline glittering behind him. He held out a ring, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by diamonds. He said, "Elena, we already said yes once, but that was a contract. This is a promise. Will you marry me? For real. For always." I said yes, through tears and laughter. We had a small ceremony on a private beach in Mallorca. Just us, Grandma, Peter, and a few close friends from work. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean, and as Damian slid the ring onto my finger, I felt the weight of the past 2 years lift off my shoulders. I was no longer the abandoned bride, the struggling student, the accused gold digger. I was his wife, his partner, his equal. During the reception, Damian gave a speech. He said, "I married a stranger once, and I lost her. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. But the universe gave me a second chance. And this time, I will never let go." Everyone clapped. Grandma wiped her eyes, and I kissed him in front of everyone. After the honeymoon, we returned to New York. I kept my job as his assistant, but I also started a foundation for single mothers. It was something I had always wanted to do. Damian supported me fully. He donated the seed money, and he helped me build a board of advisors. Within a year, we had funded scholarships for 50 women. We had provided childcare vouchers, and we had launched a mentorship program. I felt like I was finally making a difference. Damian's mother sent a letter from Switzerland. It was short. It said, "I was wrong about you. I see now that you make my son happy. I hope you can forgive me." I wrote back. I said, "I forgive you. But trust takes time. Maybe one day we can meet again as a family." She never replied. But I heard she started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Maybe she was changing. Maybe not. But I didn't dwell on it. Now it has been almost 2 years since we remarried. I wake up every morning next to Damian, his arm draped over my waist, his breath warm on my neck. I look at him, and I remember the day I walked into that boardroom, nervous and poor and desperate. I never imagined that the man behind the desk would become my everything. We are expecting a baby next spring. Grandma is overjoyed. She has already knitted a dozen little sweaters. Damian is practicing his dad jokes. He is terrible at them. But I love him more for trying. Sometimes I think about that first wedding, the cold courthouse, the stranger who barely looked at me. I think about the loneliness, the confusion, the anger. And I realize all of that pain was necessary. It led me here, to this moment, to this man, to this life. I still wear my silver band sometimes. Not because I miss the past, but because it reminds me of how far I have come. It reminds me that even when everything seems broken, there is always a chance to rebuild. Damian and I have our arguments. We disagree on where to spend the holidays. He wants to go skiing. I want to visit Grandma. He thinks I work too hard. I think he spoils me too much. But we always find a middle ground. We always come back to each other. Last night we were sitting on the balcony, watching the city lights. He asked me, if you could go back, would you change anything? I thought about it. I thought about the hospital bills, the divorce threats, the cruel headlines. And I said, no, because all of that brought me to you. He smiled, and he said, same. Then he pulled out a small velvet box. I laughed. Another ring. He said, no, this is for the baby. It was a tiny gold bracelet, engraved with our initials. I cried again. I always cry now. But they are happy tears. Today I am sitting in my office, looking at a family photo on my desk. Damian, Grandma, and me. Soon, there will be a fourth face. And I cannot wait. I know the world is full of cynics. They will say our marriage started with a transaction. They will say we are too different. But I know the truth. Love is not about how you start. It is about how you grow. We started as strangers. We became friends. Then partners. Then soulmates. And that is what I want to tell anyone who feels hopeless. Anyone who feels like their life is a series of bad deals and broken promises. You never know when a closed door might open to the most beautiful room you have ever seen. You never know when a stranger might become your home. I am Elena Vance Blackwood. I am a scientist, a philanthropist, a wife, a soon-to-be mother. And I am exactly where I am supposed to be. My story is not a fairy tale. It is better, because it is real, and it is mine. So, if you're listening to this, and you are in the middle of your own storm, hold on. The calm will come. And when it does, you will be stronger than ever. Thank you for hearing me out. This is my truth. And I would not trade it for anything. Now I have to go. Damian is calling me for dinner. He is making his famous carbonara. And I can smell garlic from the kitchen. Grandma is coming over. And she is bringing her famous apple pie. Life is messy. Life is loud. But life is beautiful. I will close my eyes and take a deep breath. And I will remember. This is the life I built. This is the love I found. This is my happy ending. And it is only the beginning.